The law has a long memory, but a soldier's promise has a longer one. In the hallowed silence of her courtroom, Judge Katherine Riley was a pillar of American justice. Her world was built on order. Her rulings were iron. A former Marine, she understood the price of duty and the unwavering weight of sacrifice. Every person who stood before her was a name in a file, a case to be weighed on the scales of the law, impartially and without emotion. Until him. The heavy oak doors opened. A defendant was led in, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of hardship. But it wasn't the face that shattered her composure. It was a ghost from 40 years ago, a thin white scar cutting through his right eyebrow. A scar from a promise forged in dust and loyalty on a forgotten military base. A promise to never leave one of their own behind. And now, he stood before her in chains. What does a judge do when her sworn duty to the flag collides with a sacred promise made to a friend? What happens when the man on trial is the one she swore she would always protect? The air in Courtroom 4 was a predictable blend of stale coffee, old paper, and the low, anxious murmur of lives about to be irrevocably altered. For the Honorable Katherine Kate Riley, this atmosphere was as familiar as her own heartbeat. It was the sterile, controlled environment where chaos was given order, where raw human emotion was filtered through the cool, logical sieve of the law. From her elevated bench, she was the arbiter of that order. A former captain in the U.S. Marine Corps Judge Advocate Division, Kate saw the world in statutes and precedents. Her black robe was more than a uniform. It was armor. It was a symbol of the system she had sworn to uphold, first as a Marine, and now as a judge. A system that demanded one thing above all: impartiality. The morning docket was a monotonous parade of human failings, petty theft, DUIs, domestic disputes. Kate moved through them with an efficiency that bordered on surgical. Her voice was steady, her rulings decisive. She was a rock in the churning sea of consequence, unmoved and absolute. The bailiff's voice droned on, calling the next case. Docket number 78B41, The People versus David Marcus. Charges are armed robbery and assault on a peace officer. Kate glanced down at the file, her expression unchanged. Another file, another number. She looked up as the defendant was led in, her mind already preparing the standard litany of rights and procedures. And then, the world stopped. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a slow, silent implosion of reality. The man in the orange jumpsuit was older, his face etched with lines of hardship she couldn't begin to comprehend. His shoulders were slumped in a way that spoke of defeat. But the way he stood, even in chains, the subtle shift of weight to the balls of his feet, the way his eyes scanned the room before finding the floor, was achingly familiar. Then he looked up, just for a second, and his eyes met hers. In that fleeting moment, 40 years of carefully constructed order crumbled into dust. It was him. It was Davy. It wasn't just the face. It was the small white scar that cut through his right eyebrow, a tiny crescent moon she hadn't seen since they were 12. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, sliced through her judicial composure. A clumsy climb up a rusty water tower on the edge of the base. A slip, a fall. He had hit the ground first, taking the brunt of it, his arm shielding her head. He'd come up bleeding and laughing, telling her not to cry, that it was just a scratch. A Marine in the making, even then. The bailiff's voice seemed to come from a great distance, pulling her back to the crushing present. The room felt tight, the air thick and unbreathable. This wasn't a defendant. This was a ghost from a life she had meticulously buried under law degrees and judicial robes. A ghost from the dusty, sun-bleached world of military bases, of shared MREs and whispered secrets in stuffy barracks housing. This was the boy who had taught her how to navigate by the stars. The boy who knew her not as Your Honor, but as Kate the Great, because she could beat all the boys in their unit at chess. And most devastatingly of all, he was the boy with whom she had made a promise. A promise sealed not with a handshake, but with the cold metallic press of their father's dog tags, held tight in their sweaty teenage palms. They were sitting on a dusty hillside overlooking a training field at Camp Lejeune, watching the disciplined ranks of Marines march in the suffocating North Carolina heat. His father was a gunnery sergeant. Hers was a major. They existed in different worlds, but on that hill, they were the same. They were kids who understood that a deployment could mean a final goodbye. "Promise me, Kate," he had said, his voice serious for the first time all summer. He'd pressed his father's spare dog tag into her hand. "It doesn't matter where we are, or what happens. We don't leave our own behind, ever. That's the code." She had pressed her own father's tag into his hand. "The code," she had whispered back. Now, that code was colliding with the official code of judicial conduct. The prosecutor, a slick, ambitious man named Peterson, was already at the podium, his voice a confident baritone as he laid out the charges. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence in this case will be clear and overwhelming. On the night of May 12th, the defendant, David Marcus, executed a violent armed robbery of a secured cash-in-transit vehicle. In the process, he severely injured one security officer and discharged a weapon at another. He is a danger to this community, and we will prove his guilt beyond any reasonable doubt." Kate stared at David, whose gaze was now firmly fixed on the polished floor. The man Peterson described was a monster, a violent felon. But the boy she remembered was a hero in waiting, a kid with a core of fierce, unwavering loyalty. The gap between those two realities was a chasm, and she was standing on the edge. Her mind raced. Recuse herself? It was the proper ethical thing to do. It was also the coward's way out. To hand him over to another judge would be to turn her back, to abandon him to the cold, impersonal machinery of the system. It would be breaking the code, the promise. This is a story about the promises we keep and the ghosts we can't outrun. It's a story that asks what happens when our sworn duty clashes with our deepest loyalties. If you believe in the power of second chances and the unbreakable bonds of the past, hit that like button and let's see this through together. Kate gripped her gavel, her knuckles white. She looked at the man in the orange jumpsuit, the boy with the scar, the keeper of her long-forgotten promise. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the air burning in her lungs. The law was clear, but the promise was made of something stronger than law. It was made of blood and dust and the unbreakable word of two kids who understood, even then, what it meant to serve. The trial of David Marcus would proceed, and she would preside. Before the law, there was life. Before the courtroom, there was the world that shaped the people within it. To understand the man in the orange jumpsuit and the woman on the bench, you have to go back. Back to a time when their uniforms were t-shirts and jeans, and their only orders came from the dinner bell. Their fathers were Marines, lifers who moved their families from one sun-scorched base to another. For the kids, this constant upheaval forged a unique kind of bond. Friendships were fast, fierce, and fleeting, born of a shared understanding that your world could be packed into boxes at a moment's notice. Kate was a major's daughter. Her world was one of books, rules, and the quiet expectation of excellence. David was a gunny's son. His world was one of skinned knees, engine grease, and the loud, boisterous camaraderie of the enlisted ranks. They should have been planets in different orbits, but a shared loneliness drew them together. Kate saw in David a raw, fearless courage she secretly admired. David saw in Kate a sharp, steady intelligence that calmed the chaos in his own life. The story of the scar, the one that now seemed like a cruel brand on David's brow in the harsh courtroom light, became a piece of their personal folklore. They were 12. A group of older, bigger kids from the base had cornered Kate by the PX, teasing her, calling her Major Bookworm. David, who was a head shorter than any of them, didn't hesitate. He launched himself into the center of the circle like a miniature bulldog, all fury and flailing limbs. He didn't win the fight, not even close. He'd ended up with a split eyebrow that required 6 stitches, a gift from a class ring worn by the lead bully. But he'd made his point. He got between them and Kate. He had protected his own. When her father, the major, had tried to thank him later, David had just shrugged, blood still crusting on his face. "Sir," he'd said, with all the gravity a 12-year-old could muster, "you protect your flank." It was the first time Kate understood that loyalty wasn't a concept. It was an action. Their paths diverged when they were 16. Kate's father was promoted and reassigned to a desk job at the Pentagon. Her family moved to the polished suburbs of Virginia. For her, the path was clear: college, law school, and then, feeling the pull of her upbringing, she accepted a commission into the Marine Corps, choosing the demanding world of the JAG. She prosecuted and defended Marines with equal ferocity, believing the system, while imperfect, was the best shield against chaos. She excelled. She made a name for herself. David's path was different. Without the resources for college, and with a restless energy that chafed against civilian life, he did the only thing that ever felt like home. He enlisted. He became an infantryman, a grunt. He didn't seek the officer's path. He sought the brotherhood of the front lines. He found it in the dusty, violent streets of Iraq. His record, which Kate now had in a sealed file in her chambers, told a story the jury would never hear. A Bronze Star for valor during the Second Battle of Fallujah, awarded for pulling 3 wounded men from a burning Humvee under heavy fire. A Purple Heart from a shrapnel wound that nearly took his leg. He was, by every official metric, a hero, and that was the terrifying question that echoed in Kate's mind as the trial began. What happens when a hero falls? What could possibly bridge the chasm between the man who saved 3 lives in a firefight and the man accused of robbing a truck and assaulting a guard? The prosecution's case hammered this question home. The first witness was the guard, a man named Henderson, his arm in a sling. His testimony was powerful. He described the sudden, brutal violence, the masked figure, the gun, the terror. He moved like a pro, Henderson said, his voice trembling. Fast, efficient, knew exactly what he was doing. Under cross-examination by the public defender, Sarah Jenkins, he admitted the attacker wore a full-face ski mask. He couldn't make a positive ID, but the damage was done. The jury saw a professional violent criminal. The next witness was the knockout blow. A man named Rick Fuller, the supposed getaway driver, took the stand as part of a plea agreement. He was a weasel of a man, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding David's stony gaze. He pointed a finger. It was his plan. All of it. He scouted the route, got the guns, said it'd be an easy score. He laid out a version of events that was detailed, coherent, and utterly damning. He claimed David was desperate for money, bitter about the world, and that his military training made him the perfect man to lead the operation. With every word from Fuller's mouth, the walls of the courtroom seemed to close in on Kate. She had to rule on Jenkins' furious objections, her voice a flat, legal monotone that betrayed none of the turmoil within. Each ruling felt like a choice. Uphold the objection, and she was helping David. Overrule it, and she was helping the state bury him. The law demanded she follow procedure. But the ghost of a 12-year-old boy with a bloody eyebrow screamed at her that procedure wasn't the same as truth. The past wasn't just a memory, it was evidence. Evidence of a man who was once a hero. But the man in the witness box was painting a picture of a monster. Which one was the truth? And could she, the judge, even be trusted to tell the difference? The weight of it all was immense, a physical pressure on her chest, threatening to crack the very foundation of who she thought she was. The prosecution rested its case with an air of finality, leaving the courtroom in a pall of presumed guilt. Rick Fuller's testimony had been a poison arrow, and it had hit its mark. The jury looked at David Marcus and saw not a veteran, but a villain. Now, it was the defense's turn. Sarah Jenkins, David's young public defender, stood up. She lacked the polished arrogance of the prosecutor, but in her eyes, there was a fire. She wasn't just defending a client, she was defending a principle. She believed the system had a blind spot, a terrible gaping hole, where it came to the men and women it sent to war and then forgot. Her first move was to attack the physical evidence. The forensics team testified that while the stolen cash was found in David's apartment, it was in a duffel bag that had been wiped clean of all prints, except for one partial smudge that didn't match David. A bag, Jenkins thundered, that could have been placed there by anyone. Placed there perhaps by a man who was given a deal in exchange for his testimony. She looked directly at the jury, letting the implication hang in the air. But her masterstroke was not in the evidence. It was in the story she chose to tell. A story not of a crime, but of a man. The prosecution wants you to believe that a man's life can be defined by one night, she said in her opening for the defense. We are going to show you the life that led up to that night. The life of a soldier. Her first witness was a name that made Kate's heart stop. The defense calls Sergeant Major Thomas Miller to the stand. A man in his late 50s, ramrod straight even in a civilian suit, walked to the stand. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, his eyes holding a quiet authority that instantly commanded the room's respect. He was David's former first sergeant. Sergeant Major, Jenkins began, could you tell the court how you know the defendant? Miller's voice was gravelly. The sound of 1,000 commands shouted over the roar of engines and gunfire. I know him as Corporal Marcus. He was in my platoon. Anbar Province, 2004. Toughest year of my life. And what kind of a Marine was Corporal Marcus? Miller turned his gaze from Jenkins to the jury, and for a moment, he wasn't in a courtroom anymore. He was back in the dust and the heat. You want to know what kind of Marine he was? I'll tell you. He was the kind you pray for, the kind you build a platoon around. He was quiet, kept to himself. But when the world came apart, he was the calm in the storm. He was the man you looked for. He paused, his eyes finding David for a brief, affirming moment. We were on a patrol outside Fallujah. Ambush. The world just exploded. You heard the roar of the RPG a split second before you felt the heat. It took out our lead vehicle, turned it into a fireball. We were pinned down, the air thick with the smell of cordite and fear, the grit of sand in our teeth. My radio man, a kid named Garcia, barely 18, went down in the open. He was hit bad. The order came down the line. Pop smoke and pull back. We can't get to him. That was the order. A sensible order. A tactical order. The courtroom was utterly silent. But Marcus didn't hear an order, Miller continued, his voice cracking slightly. He heard a brother screaming. Before I could stop him, he was out of our position, running toward the fire, not away from it, zigzagging, laying down his own suppressing fire. It was the bravest, stupidest thing I've ever seen. He got to Garcia, threw the kid over his shoulder, and Garcia was not a small kid, and ran back through that storm of bullets. He got him back to the line. Garcia lived. He has 3 kids today, because of David Marcus. Miller's testimony wasn't just a story, it was a counter-narrative. It presented a true character, so profoundly at odds with the prosecution's version that it forced the jury to question everything. We've all known someone who deserved a second chance, someone whose single mistake didn't erase a lifetime of good. Who is that person for you? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to NX Incredible Stories for more tales that matter. The prosecutor, Peterson, tried to dismantle the testimony on cross-examination. A heroic act, Sergeant Major. No one denies it. But that was over a decade ago. People change, don't they? Miller's eyes were ice. Some things don't change, counselor. Courage, honor. You either have it or you don't. It doesn't have an expiration date. Finally, David took the stand. He was quiet, dignified. He spoke of his struggles after his discharge, the nightmares, the feeling of being disconnected, the series of dead-end jobs. He didn't ask for pity. He simply stated facts. When Jenkins asked him about the night of the robbery, his answer was direct. I was at a friend's place, Rick Fuller's. He asked me to hold a bag for him. Said he owed some dangerous people money and was scared to keep it at his house. I did it. I was trying to help a friend. I didn't know what was in it. That was my mistake, trusting the wrong man. It's a mistake I've made before. He looked at the jury. I've been in fights for my life. I know what that feels like. This isn't that. This is something else. This is a fight for my name, the name I served under. The scales of justice were now balanced on the edge of a knife. On one side, the convenient testimony of a felon and the cold, circumstantial evidence. On the other, the fiery testimony of a soldier's honor and the quiet dignity of a man who refused to be broken. The jury was about to decide which story carried more weight. And Kate Riley, the woman on the bench, held her breath, caught in the crossfire between her two worlds. The weight was an entity unto itself, a living, breathing thing that filled the empty courtroom. After the closing arguments, Peterson's sharp clinical summary of the evidence, countered by Jenkins' passionate plea to look at the man, not the file, the jury filed out. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing with an unnerving finality. The courtroom emptied, leaving behind the 3 central figures in the drama. A defendant escorted to a holding cell, a prosecutor packing his briefcase with practiced confidence, and a judge retreating into the solitary silence of her chambers. For Kate, this silence was louder than any testimony. She sat at her large desk, the symbols of her authority surrounding her, law books, gavels, the American flag standing sentinel in the corner. But her eyes were fixed on a single object she had pulled from a locked drawer, a small, tarnished silver frame. Inside was a faded photograph of 2 grinning, sun-browned kids in cut-off jeans, their arms thrown around each other's shoulders. 12-year-old Kate and Davy, a lifetime ago. On the desk next to it, she laid the file for the people versus David Marcus. The 2 objects represented the 2 halves of her soul, and they were at war. The photograph whispered of loyalty, of shared history, of a promise made with the innocent conviction of youth. The legal file screamed of duty, of evidence, of the dispassionate application of the law. For hours, she went over the testimony in her head. The guard's fear, Fuller's treacherous certainty, Sergeant Miller's unwavering belief, David's quiet, wounded dignity. The system she had dedicated her life to was designed to find truth. But what if the truth was more complicated than the evidence allowed? What if the system, in its relentless pursuit of convictions and closed cases, was crushing the very people it was meant to protect? Men like David, who had given everything in one uniform, only to be judged and discarded in another. This wasn't just a legal deliberation, it was a moral reckoning. The knock on her door made her jump. It was the bailiff. "Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict." As she walked back to the bench, the weight of her robe felt like a physical burden. The jury filed in, their faces grim, impossible to read. David was brought to the defendant's table. He stood, his jaw set, ready for the final blow. Kate looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of communication, not as a judge, but as Kate. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "I see you." She looked from the jury to David, the law, or the code. In this moment, she knew they had to be the same thing. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with weary eyes, stood and unfolded a piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly. "In the matter of the People versus David Marcus, on the charge of armed robbery, we the jury find the defendant." The silence stretched for an eternity. "Not guilty." A collective gasp swept the room, followed by a burst of sobs from Sarah Jenkins. David's legs seemed to buckle. He gripped the table for support, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking relief. Kate struck the gavel, her own hand surprisingly steady. "The defendant is released from custody. This court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted into a quiet chaos of hugs and hurried exits. Kate retreated to her chambers, leaving the door slightly ajar. She needed a moment before facing the world again. A few minutes later, a hesitant knock. It was David. He stood in the doorway, no longer in an orange jumpsuit, but in his own worn clothes. He looked smaller without the chains, more vulnerable. They gave me my things back," he said, holding up a small plastic bag. "I'm glad, David," Kate said softly. He stepped inside, the room suddenly feeling too small for their shared history. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "Why didn't you recuse yourself, Kate? You could have lost everything. They find out we knew each other." Here it was, the question that lay beneath the entire trial. Her answer would define not just her past, but her future. "Because of the dog tag promise," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Because you don't leave your own behind. Not then, not now. That's the code." She gave a small, sad smile. But I was also terrified. For the whole trial, I had to face the question. What if you were guilty? What would that say about us? About everything we believed in? I had to see it through. I had to know. A silent understanding passed between them, a bridge across 40 years of silence. "Thank you," he said, the words full of a meaning that went far beyond the verdict, "for listening." As he turned to leave, a new clarity, a new purpose crystallized in Kate's mind. This was her inciting incident. "David, wait," she said. He turned back. "This trial, it opened my eyes to something. Our system, it isn't built for men like you. It doesn't know what to do with you. And that's not your failure. It's ours." She took a deep breath, a decision solidifying into a vow. "I'm going to change that. I'm going to use my position to start a new program here. A veterans court. a place focused on rehabilitation, not just punishment, a place that understands, a place that helps instead of just judging. The gavel had fallen. Justice, in one form, had been served. But for Judge Kate Riley, the real work was just beginning. She had judged a man, and in doing so, had found a mission. She wasn't just an arbiter of the law anymore. She was about to become a builder of second chances. A single choice can be like a stone dropped into a still pond. The splash is immediate, the verdict, the freedom, the relief. But the true impact is in the ripples that spread outward, touching shores you never thought possible, changing the landscape forever. The story of Judge Kate Riley and David Marcus didn't end when the gavel fell. In fact, that was the beginning. It was the start of a story about two kinds of justice, the kind written in law books and the kind written on the human heart. Legal justice is about facts, evidence, and procedure. It's a necessary, intricate machine designed to keep society from spiraling into chaos. Kate had served that machine her entire life, and she had served it well. But David's trial had shown her its limitations. It had revealed a profound truth. The machine of justice is not equipped to see the soul. It cannot weigh the invisible burdens that so many of our veterans carry home with them. It can't see the loyalty, the honor, or the trauma that defines their experience long after the uniform comes off. This is the moral justice Kate was now determined to serve. Every veteran, when they return, carries what some call an invisible backpack. It's filled with the weight of things seen and unseen, of friends lost, of choices made in the crucible of combat. For some, that backpack is heavy but manageable. For others, like David, its weight can be crushing, throwing them off balance in a world that doesn't understand the load they bear. They aren't broken, they are burdened. David's story wasn't an anomaly. It was an echo of thousands of similar stories playing out in courtrooms across the country. And Kate had finally heard that echo. This leads to one of the most vital concepts for anyone who has ever served: the search for a post-traumatic purpose. The greatest challenge for a warrior in peacetime is not just to heal from the trauma, but to find a mission that feels as vital and meaningful as the one they left behind. In the service, your purpose is clear. Protect your country. Protect your brothers and sisters in arms. Back home, that purpose can vanish, leaving a void that is often filled with confusion, anger, and despair. For Kate, David's trial filled that void. The creation of the Veterans Court became her new mission. It was her way of continuing to serve, to protect her own. Let's fast forward 6 months. We're not in the imposing formal Courtroom 4 anymore. We are in a smaller, brighter room in the courthouse basement. The judge's bench is gone, replaced by a simple wooden table. The flags are still there, but the atmosphere is different. It's not one of judgment, but of counsel. This is the first session of the Harris County Veterans Treatment Court. Judge Kate Riley presides, but she's not wearing her black robe. She's in a simple blazer, speaking not down to the men and women before her, but to them. They are all veterans who have stumbled, caught in the web of the law, for offenses stemming from addiction, homelessness, and the deep wounds of trauma. They are not being sentenced. They are being given a path that includes treatment, mentorship, and community. And sitting in the front row, not as a defendant, but as a pillar of the program, is David Marcus. He's a mentor now. His shoulders are no longer slumped. His eyes are clear and focused. He's found his post-traumatic purpose. We see him after the session, talking to a young Marine, barely 22, who was arrested for a bar fight. The kid is angry, defiant, lost. "I get it," David says to him, his voice low and steady. "You feel like the world's forgotten you exist, like you're a ghost. I've been there. But you're not a ghost Marine, and you're not alone. Here, we don't leave our own behind." He claps a hand on the young man's shoulder, and in that simple gesture, the ripple effect becomes clear. The promise made between two kids decades ago has now become the founding principle of a place of healing. Kate's choice to listen, to believe in the true character of her old friend, didn't just save one man. It created a sanctuary that would save countless more. One choice, one act of faith in a person's true character, can change everything. It can restore a life, redeem a promise, and create a ripple of hope that travels further than we can ever imagine. The stories of our veterans are the stories of our nation. Tales of incredible sacrifice, resilience, and the undying search for purpose. The story doesn't truly end with the verdict. It doesn't end with a gavel's fall or the opening of a cell door. It finds its true beginning in a quiet room, with one veteran extending a hand to another, finally closing a circle of a promise made 40 years ago. What we've witnessed is a story about two kinds of justice. One is written in law books, bound by procedure and evidence. It is rigid and necessary. But the other is a higher justice, a deeper code. It's the justice written on a soldier's heart, a code of honor, of loyalty, of never leaving your own behind. Judge Kate Riley, a woman who swore an oath to the law, ultimately found the courage to honor the code she learned first. This story reminds us that the weight of service isn't always measured in medals or citations. It's measured in the quiet battles fought long after the war is over. It's carried in the invisible backpack of memory and in the lifelong search for a new purpose, a new mission. David Marcus was a hero on the battlefield, but his greatest battle was fought right here at home, a fight to be seen not as a suspect, but as the man he truly was. And in the end, it was a single act of faith. One person's choice to look past the file and see the man that made all the difference. It created a ripple effect, turning a place of judgment into a place of healing. That is the legacy of honor. It isn't found in never falling. It's found in the strength to get back up and in the compassion to help another soldier get back on their feet. If this story touched your heart, please help us share it. Like this video and subscribe to NX Incredible Stories. Every subscription, every share is a way of saying thank you to the men and women who served. It ensures these incredible stories of honor, sacrifice, and the enduring power of the human spirit are never forgotten. Thank you for watching.